Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are back for my LCK Week 2 review analysis and power rankings. It was a very fun week of LCK action this week. Some upsets, some teams maybe underperforming in general, and a clearer sense of what we are looking at in terms of maybe the kind of consensus power rankings going into Week 3 and beyond. I hope you guys are excited. If you are, go ahead and tell me down in the comment section below. It always lets me know that you guys are enjoying the videos. Of course, liking it does as well, but I understand if you don't want to like until you've seen the content. So I'll get right into the content. First up, we're going to talk about the first series of day one, and that was NS RedForce taking on DAMWON KIA in a 2-1 series win for NS. A very big win here for NS. A lot of people are going to be surprised that they were able to end up picking up the victory in this one, but I actually think it was very well deserved, and DK definitely has some gigantic problems that they need to get fixed. So let's talk game by game. Game 1, a really solid NS win. Dread played really well. So did Ghost on the Sivir. Those team fights were really good late. Peter on the Yuumi, that's been the pick for Peter ever since coming in for effort earlier in the year. And clearly it works. You know, I'm not going to say that I love the Yuumi pick all the time and that I think, oh, I'm so happy that a team is doing well by picking Yuumi a lot. But NS certainly have found a good groove here in picking Yuumi with some more traditionally, I don't want to say passive, but more supportive AD carries. Sivir, Sivir becomes a hard carry, but definitely not early. Jhin and Ezreal aren't traditionally your hard carry AD carry styles, as opposed to what Dectum was playing on the other side. So great games here from Dread and Ghost in game 1, but really, the story is Hoya just got abused in the top lane, so much so that he was actually subbed out for games 2 and 3 here for Bertle, which is something that I think a lot of DAMWON fans have been waiting for. Bertle is certainly higher potential than Hoya. Hoya has really looked like a bottom 2 top laner in the league since the start of the season here with DAMWON. He has had a really, really rough start to the year. And so finally DK pulls the trigger. They put Bertle in here for game 2, which DK does take. A lot on the back of Dectum just being super good on the Aphelios. That's really always been his pick. But in game 2 especially, we saw Y with the Sona as the support there. Bertle coming in on the Jace died a little bit early, but was eventually more of a factor than I think Hoya has been all year up to this point. And then obviously when Showmaker gets Twisted Fate, it just feels pretty unfair. So game 2 going in DK's favor. Game 3, again, being really close, but Dread, honestly, just kind of taking over, which is really weird to say going into Canyon, who most people have as the best jungler of all time at this point. For Dread to just kind of win this matchup, like, really outright, I think surprised a lot of people. I really do like the Poppy in the jungle. I think that that's a pick that very often works, especially in the LCK. I think this is a good environment for that. And we really saw that in this series, in this game 3 especially. When you have a mid laner that's willing to play around you as a jungler, when you have the Poppy, you open up a lot of different circumstances. And even not just on Poppy, but on the Xin Zhao and the Viego, pretty much every pick, when you have a mid laner that's willing to kind of help you with that, you open up a lot of different options. You have that this year in BDD. Didn't have it so much last year with Fly, but Dread is looking like a new jungler to me. I know he's always been amazing in solo queue, but I never really saw it on stage, at least the consistency of it. The first couple weeks here, Dread has been phenomenal for NS. One of the best players. Dread and Peter are two that have really stood out to me as some players that have really made this NS cog work. But I want to give a huge shout out to Ghost here, who did do so much damage on the Ezreal in game 3 against his former team. It very much felt like a revenge game for Ghost, and he came through. His best series of the year so far. But for DAMWON, like I said, the bot lane did do some work. Dectum basically carrying DK to a win in game 2, but the mid-jungle duo honestly disappointed a tad bit, especially Canyon in the jungle, basically getting out-jungled by Dread throughout the majority of the series. And then Showmaker, well, he didn't have any terrible games. BDD was a little bit more proactive with the jungle spot and was able to create a little bit more across the map, everything except game 2, where Showmaker got Twisted Fate, and that's basically a cheat code, but Hoya and or Bertle in the top lane are going to be my duds of the series. It's just a tough position right now for DAMWON. They need to figure out whatever this top lane problem is, because if they don't figure it out soon, I'm going to struggle to really consider them in that top echelon, because you can't have a weakness as big as their top lane is right now and still be considered a top team, in my opinion. But gigantic win for Nongshim. They are probably a lot better than they were week 1. Ever since Peter subbed in, I think even BDD has really stepped up his performances recently. He had a rough week 1, but, you know, he's playing a lot better now. He's playing much more like BDD. I think this team could be really, really scary, and potentially one of the top teams in the LCK if things really start rolling their way. Jumping into the second series here of day 1, we had KT Rolster taking on Hanwha Life in a really solid 2-0 win here for KT. One that I don't think would surprise a lot of people with how KT played in week 1. Maybe the thing that would be most surprising is how we got there. And how we got there was a genuine masterclass of 2 games from Rascal in the top lane. I got a lot of flack in my preseason power rankings for putting Rascal higher than Doran, replacing him on Gen.G. People were very confused with that, and I understand why. You know, Doran being the new Gen.G, you know, top laner, replacing Rascal with Doran, you would think Gen.G would think that as an upgrade. I think it more of a stylistic choice here. But Rascal comes into KT, and he is unlocked here. He's given a lot more opportunity, I think, to really shine on a team where you don't necessarily have that hyper carry, like you did with Ruler in the bot lane or BDD in the mid lane. He's going to be given a lot more opportunity on this roster, even more so than he was on KT originally. Because Arya, while is a good player, I'm not saying Arya is bad, is definitely not the focal point of this team, and neither are Aiming in Life. Rascal is going to be kind of the big focal point for this team early game, and I think that actually really, really is interesting for him. 2 really, really fun builds here. He goes the Chemtech Akali in the first game, or the Chemtank Akali in the first game, I should say. That's kind of gaining popularity. I like the build a lot. And I think I could definitely see that making pro play a lot more interesting in the top lane, especially. And then Lee Sin in the top as well, which was a pick that we know Rascal is good on. We'd love to see him pull it out here, and he did really, really well on those fights at the end of Game 2. Game 1 really should have been a Hanwha Life win in general. They had a gigantic lead going into late game, but Rascal did a good job on that Akali of really just not being killable and creating situations where these fights were just too hard to deal with for Hanwha, eventually causing, you know, KT to win. You know, and then Game 2 was pretty straightforward. It was a KT win, a little bit slow, but still a nice KT win. Life had a really good game in Game 2 with those polymorphs. There was basically nothing that anybody on Hanwha could even do. I remember Gragas went in, I believe, in one of the late fights and got polymorphed twice in like 7 seconds, and it was just like, I feel that. You know, we've all been there in solo queue at some point, but yeah, a great series here from KT. Rascal is obviously going to be my player of the series here. He was really, really solid. Arya had a good series as well. I'm still on the fence about Cuz. Cuz had some interesting things here. I don't know. He's got to prove to me that he's bouncing back from what was a poor week 1. He's definitely the weak point of this KT Rolster roster at the beginning of this year. Hanwha, on the other hand, they're not as good as their early win would tell you that they were. They're just a mediocre team, if not a poor one in comparison to LCK teams. Do I think they could take some games off of some teams that are struggling right now? Absolutely, for sure. But overall, I just don't think they have the talent to compete with a team like KT or a team like Nongshim or a team like, you know, even like DRX or Kwangdong, who are really struggling right now. I think that, you know, as we move on, the league will eventually balance itself out. They just don't seem to have that kind of firepower. Karis is going to be my dud of the series here. He didn't have a terrible series at all, but he just got caught a little bit too much in Game 2 for my liking. And in Game 1, I mean, you're the Corki going into this late game. I know you're going into an Aphelios and then a Chemtank Akali, but, like, you have to be able to win those fights, and he wasn't able to win those fights. And then in Game 2, he just got caught a lot on the Vex. Really kind of got outplayed in lane by Arya. So overall, Karis is going to be my dud of the series, but nobody on Hanwha played particularly well. I thought OnFleek had some decent early games, and the bot lane didn't necessarily shit the bed, but it's not like either bot lane really had a huge advantage. I know a lot of people are talking about Dudu in the top lane of not being, like, great, but I thought Rascal honestly just played better rather than Dudu playing, like, horrible this series. Again, in team fights, I thought he would have been useful had the team comp not just been able to completely counter him on the Gragas. So overall, you know, Hanwha played fine, but they're just not going to be a team that's able to compete with a team like KT overall. And then for KT, great job, you know, really coming into your own in this series. I think this is the best they've probably looked all year long in terms of completeness. I'm still a little bit worried about Cuz, but the solo lanes are looking a lot better. Rascal looks phenomenal. The bot lane's still kind of a meh point for me, but hopefully they can continue to get better. Just a good series overall from KT to kind of inspire some confidence after some good and some bad in the opening week. Moving on to our first series here of day 2, we had DRX, the winless DRX taking on the undefeated T1 in a series that went exactly as the records would show, but maybe one that would have been closer if these teams played up to expectations, unfortunately. But T1 taking the 2-0 series win here, both games being pretty confident wins for T1, basically on the back of Faker being Faker. Like I said, I think with a bunch of other players this offseason, notably Rookie, I think over in the LPL, the rumors of Faker's death have been greatly exaggerated. I don't know where all of this hate towards Faker has come from in the recent years. It's like people didn't watch him play last year, and they just assume that because he's older now that he's worse, but he's still one of the best players in the world. Yeah, I mean, Showmaker might be better, you know, Chovy might be better, but, like, Faker's still really freaking good. He's easily one of the top 5 to 10 players in the world, and he proved that again in this series where he just dominated. The Game 1 Tryndamere pick, I believe, is his 70th unique pick of his career, which is just nuts in general. But he looked great on it. You know, he absolutely took over the game. They had absolutely no answer. You can look at the comp on DRX and you can go, wow, okay, so they have no peel and no range. I'm not really sure how they beat the Tryndamere, and that's exactly what happened here. Poor Deft really didn't even get to play the game on the Aphelios because, yeah, Aphelios and the Tryndamere, what are you even going to do? And then game 2, more of a group effort here, I would say, from T1. The top side played really well in game 2. Zeus, I believe, was 7 unique picks in 7 games, which I think is really cool to see here. The Fiora pick in game 2 is something we see out of him in solo queue. Hopefully we can see, I believe he plays like, you know, Akshan and Yone and stuff like that in solo queue as well. So that would be awesome to see in the LCK as well. I think that would be really cool, but he had a good game too, and Owner really had a great game too on the Viego, kind of took over. Faker played well on Corki, but Faker always plays well on Corki, so not really a big shout out. My player of the series is clearly going to be Faker. On the DRX side, the top side's just not looking good. It's kind of the same story we've been talking about for the beginning of the year here. Kingen and Pioshik are the weak point for this team. Pioshik is going to be my dud of the series here, really out-jungled by Owner at every aspect. He's been out-jungled in pretty much every series he's played up till this point this year, and that is a disaster if you are DRX, because he was probably the member everyone was most excited about kind of carrying this team going into this year. He has been a huge letdown at the start of the season here. If you're looking for a positive as the series could be, because they're really, I mean, if we're being honest, there weren't any positives in this series for DRX, but if you're looking in a direction that you're hoping could be a positive in the future, I think Beryl still had a mind of engages here on the Rel, which I think is good. I know some people are going to say that he engaged at terrible times, but, you know, if his team was in a better position, I think some of these Rel engages could be really good. I still think Beryl could be a top-level support in the world. And then, I don't know how good Deft is. Honestly, I can't tell you how good Deft is because he doesn't even get to play the game. He does well in laning phase. Him and Beryl did a really good job laning against Gumayusi and Keria, who a lot of people have as the best bottom lane in the LCK right now. They did a good job laning into them. They just didn't really get to do anything after that because you're Deft as an Aphelios into a Tryndamere that's super fed. I mean, what are you really going to do? And then in game 2, you're a Ziggs, and you're not going to have a ton of teamfight impact if you're not super ahead. So, you know, that's just unfortunately what it is with DRX right now is, while the bot lane may be kind of an area of strength for them, it doesn't matter because the top side loses so hard that it really doesn't even matter. Zika was a non-factor this game. He wasn't even in half the fights, especially in game 1 on the Corki. So, really, DRX has a lot of problems to figure out, but pretty much all of them for me revolve around Kingen and Pioshik really getting it together. I know Kingen, we didn't have a ton of expectations for, but Pioshik's my guy, and someone who played really phenomenally last year, especially in spring. He's got to figure it out if this team at all wants to be anywhere near where I had them in my preseason power rankings. But for T1, another really solid series. I mean, they're starting the year 6-1, 3-0, a perfect start to the year if you're T1, exactly what you want. Faker looks as good as ever. Owner has really, whatever change Owner made in the offseason has certainly worked out. People didn't like that I had Krako above him. I thought Krako for sure outplayed him last year, but Owner has really stepped into his own at the beginning of this year. Zeus is looking good, and then Gumayushi and Keria are, like I said, potentially the best bot lane in the LCK. So overall, a great look here from T1, and a really consistent win for them, as they've shown time and time again throughout the start of this year. Moving into our second series here of day 2, we had Fredit BRION taking on Gen.G in another battle between a top team and a bottom team, but this one was a lot closer. Both teams actually played really well in this series, and I feel bad for BRION getting 2-0'd here, but Gen.G does take the 2-0 series win. Like I said, this was a really close series. BRION played their hearts out, for sure. Pretty much every player on this team actually played really well in team fights. Maybe with the exception of actually, no. Everyone on that team played really well in team fights, just generally. And so did Gen.G. Honestly, everybody in this game played well. This was a really fun series to watch. Game 1 was pretty firmly back and forth until you hit that point where BRION was just like, I guess we don't want to play macro anymore. And that's, unfortunately, just kind of what you get with some of the bottom tier teams. They don't want to take risks. I know there was that situation where everybody wanted Morgan to just solo Dragon while Gen.G was taking Baron. They would basically be trading Baron for Infernal Soul, which is huge for BRION, but they didn't do that. They played it safe, and it ended up costing them. Either way, the game 1 was really fun. Chovy playing really well in game 1 on the Galio. That was kind of the big thing, and then Jinx just kind of taking over those team fights. Ruler is obviously going to be your late game carry, always is going to be that. He's just completely consistent. And then in game 2, it was much more of a group effort here from Gen.G, even with Fredit BRION still playing well. I want to give a big shout out to Morgan in this series. We talked a lot of crap on Morgan last year of him being like maybe the worst LCK top laner. He's playing much better this year, and he looked really good in this series. He was one of the best players from both teams in the series on the Gwen. He was just making plays play after play. He was unkillable in these team fights. He was a big reason why Fredit BRION was even in these games in the first place. So, good for him. He's had a good start to the year, and if he can continue that, that's going to be awesome for him. As for you know, again, decent performance. Game 2 was just a nightmare, right? You get Flame Horizoned in the jungle by Peanut on the Talon, but that's what a good Talon will do to you. That's why I always say, if you're the better player and you're on Talon, like, you're going to take over the game. Because, I mean, he's going to take every single one of your camps, and you can do absolutely nothing about it. And that's basically what happened here. Peanut's having a great start to the year. Him and Chovy have great chemistry. And I haven't even really talked about Chovy too much, but his Orianna in game 2 was nuts and was fantastic and a big reason why they won that late game team fight there. Chovy's gonna be my player of the series, although it could have gone to Ruler. Ruler had a good game 1, but Chovy, I think, had a good game 1 and game 2, so Chovy's my player of the series here. And honestly, could have gone to Morgan. Morgan was phenomenal in the series as well. My dud of the series is gonna go to Delight, just not the proactive recon engages you want in game 2, but outside of that, it's hard for me to even give a dud of the series, because I thought everybody in this series played relatively well. Delight was probably the worst of the 10 players, but even on that front, Delight still played fine. Like, I think in most cases, Delight would not be a dud of the series here. Just, unfortunately, everyone played well. But yeah, good win here for Gen.G. Not really a disaster for Bro at all. We have a lot of people have Gen.G as the top team in the LCK, and for them to kind of go toe to toe with them for most of this game is really strong. But Gen.G just looks really in sync. I think this team could certainly be one of the best teams the LCK has seen in a very long time. If Chovy, Chovy has a team around him now, look what he can do. That's kind of the big takeaway from this series for me. Jumping into our Day 3 kickoff series here, we had Liiv SANDBOX taking on the Kwangdong Freecs, and KDF finally picks up their first series win of the year here in a 2-0 big series win for them. They obviously should be the better team in this matchup, and finally they proved that they were. I think for the first time this season, they kind of lived up to expectations. Game 1 was really solid, I think, from everybody on KDF. Genuinely, I think, you could kind of give this player of the game in Game 1 to anybody. I love the Poppy pick. I'm always going to love the Poppy pick, and Ellum finally, maybe for the first time all year, looked like a competent LCK jungler on that Poppy here in Game 1. He was pretty good. But Keen and Teddy also had a really good game there on the Jace, the Jinx, even the Thresh from Hoyt, you know, kind of performed well in that first game. And then in game 2, it was really just a stomp from moment 1 here. Teddy just taking over on that Jinx. Teddy's going to be my player of the series here. He did step up in a big way. Early in the season, I think you could definitely have made the case that Keen and Teddy were kind of held back a little bit by how poorly their jungle and support Ellum and Hoyt had been playing at the beginning of the year. I don't think they necessarily played phenomenal, and I definitely think that they had some problems. But I think this was a series where Ellum and Hoyt weren't necessarily the big problems anymore, and Keen and Teddy kind of got the chance to really play for the first time this year, and they showed that they could still win games. Teddy especially on the Jinx looked great in that game too. Ellum, I think, looked great on the Poppy in game 1. Keen looked great in both games, and so did Hoyt, which was a big shock to me because Hoyt had not been good up to this point, and he didn't even really show like he had a lot of chemistry with Teddy either, so just a really necessary series here for KDF. But for SANDBOX, not great. They just looked lost at pretty much every point. Kale is going to be my dud of the series here. He looked terrible. Ice is actually subbing in here for Envy. Sure, I mean, it's still the worst bot lane in the LCK. Whatever you want, whoever is in there at 80 carry, that's still the worst bot lane in the LCK. We saw it get abused in this series here. Ice and Kale are just not ready. Envy wasn't ready either. They're just not on the same level as these LCK bot laners. I'm not saying they can't get there with a little more time, but right now they are certainly not. They are certainly not there. Closer had an abysmal series. Going into Fate, who I thought was probably like the least impressive quote-unquote member of KDF in this series. I mean, he still looked really good on the Twisted Fate and the Orianna, but Closer got dominated in lane. As LeBlanc into TF, you really have to win lane, like 1v1, and weren't really able to do that. The Victor should completely outpush the Orianna, didn't really do that. An abysmal series from Closer. And then Krako just lost map control to Ellum after everything else kind of lost. I'm not going to put this one too much on Krako, but Dub I thought was like the only player really even trying to make plays by the end of game 2 on the Gwen. But at that point, it was just too lost. So, a really solid win here for KDF. For SANDBOX, not the series you wanted to see. They looked good at some points in week 1, but this is probably closer to the output that we expected from Liiv. Maybe a little closer than this, but this isn't a top 6 team in the LCK. Just top to bottom, they don't have it. Their bot lane is a disaster. And Closer is so inconsistent that it's hard for me to even consider him one of the better LCK mids, even though he does have some high highs. Dub and Krako are playing well, and they are trying their best, but the rest of the team not necessarily following up. But KDF needed this win badly, especially Ellum and Hoyt needed this win and needed this performance to kind of solidify maybe their confidence just a little bit. They had really, really rough starts to the year, and for them to kind of bounce back in a better way in this series, I think is really important for this team's mental overall. Jumping into our second series here of day 3, we had KT Rolster taking on NS RedForce in a series between two teams that I think are kind of competing for that upper echelon of LCK teams. And in this one, we had NS actually taking the 2-1 series win. Unfortunately for KT fans, they got just a tad bit too excited after game 1, and now we are here. But let's talk about it. Game 1 was a KT win, and it was a really strong KT win off the back of Rascal again. I know, I said a lot about Rascal in the first series, and he did it again here in game 1. He got his Lee Sin again. He's one of the best Lee Sins in the world, even though he doesn't even play jungle. He's so good that they can put him in the top lane with it in a meta where that's not even really what Lee Sin can do anymore. And he's still going to dominate on it. And he did in game 1. The displacement was unbelievable. Him and Life really are what are propelling this KT Rolster team to being like super duper good at the beginning of this year, in my opinion. Again, the two players that I think a lot of people gave me crap for rating highly in my power rankings are definitely coming through here for KT. But yeah, Rascal and Life played phenomenal in game 1. The Lee Sin displacement, the set engages, and then obviously the follow-up from aiming is good on the Kalista as well. I'm not a huge fan of the Kalista pick in general, but if aiming feels comfortable on it, whatever works, I'm not going to complain too hard. And then game 2 came around, and it was kind of a stomp here. Game 2, the best way I can describe it is gigantic jungle gap. Dread is just better than Cuz, and there's really no other way to say it. Dread is just much better than Cuz, and he played like it. Cuz had a really poor series overall, but Dread had another really great series, something that we've said a lot for Nongshim at the beginning of this year. He's been a very pleasant surprise for me for Nongshim. But speaking of pleasant surprises, let's talk about Game 3. And let's talk about Peter on this Alistar. Peter was someone who wasn't even in this lineup at the beginning of the year. And then when he did come in, you know, even I said it at the beginning of this episode, where I'm like, well, Peter's kind of this Yuumi player that, you know, he helps them win, and if that's going to work out, whatever. But no Yuumi this series. He looked phenomenal on the Alistar in Game 3. He's actually going to be my player of the series here for Nongshim. He was really, really good in all 3 games. And if this is the kind of, you know, performance you're going to get out of Peter on a regular basis, I mean, what an absolute steal Nongshim has in him here. I feel bad for Effort, because he's never getting this job back if Peter plays like this. He's really been a breath of fresh air for this Nongshim team, and he is a big reason why they won this series. That, and just kind of the gap that was in the jungle, you know, in general. Mid lane was a little bit of a gap as well, but it's BDD into Arya, so not a huge surprise, and not nearly as big as the jungle gap, but Dread just obliterating Cuz. Cuz is going to be my dud of the series here. That's a sentence that KT Rolster fans have heard already this year. And he's definitely the weak point of this KT Rolster team. There really is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Cuz, you're going to live or die by whether or not he ints the game away. Even when they won earlier in the week, Cuz was still not playing at his best. They might need to look for a replacement here if they really want to be a top-level team, because Cuz is just not it. Whatever Cuz was 2 years ago, in 2020, which he was great, and, you know, I'll give him that. And in 2019, you know, he's not that anymore. He's certainly not that anymore. Because Rascal's playing his heart out, Life is playing his heart out, aiming, you know, not playing amazing, but still playing well. Like, you've got talent on this team that can propel you into a, like, pretty secure playoff spot, but right now you're just not hitting that mark, because, unfortunately, your jungle is a huge liability. Arya has shown at times to be a liability as well, but not necessarily to the same level, and just because you're getting gapped by BDD doesn't mean that you're a bad player, so... you know, overall, definite things to work on for KT, but positives for KT being Rascal is still phenomenal. Rascal is actually having the split of his career so far through the first 2 weeks, or at least some of the games of his career, and that's awesome to see. Life seems like a great pickup. He has great synergy with aiming. I think those two could be not one of the best bot lanes or anything in the LCK, but a stable bot lane that does really well. You're just kind of hoping that jungle mid can come around. And then for Nongshim, I mean, ever since you put Peter in this lineup, everything seems to be sunshine and rainbows. Kana isn't the best in the top lane, but he's not the worst either, and really, he's gone up against some really tough competition in the last couple games. I expect him to turn it around. I still think he's one of the better top laners in the LCK, and then everybody else on the team is kind of just playing phenomenal. Dread's having the split of his career. BDD, while he had a really rough start to the year, had a good week too, and then Peter has been, I mean, the surprise of the year in the LCK, period. Full stop. He's come in, and he's been one of the better supports in all of the LCK, so... gotta be really excited if you're a Nongshim fan in general as to how you've started this year. Moving into day 4, we get to kick it off with some of the more boring games that you're going to see all year long. Some of the more LCK, quote-unquote, traditionally LCK games you're going to see all year long. We had DAMWON KIA taking on Fredit BRION in a really boring, really slow series. Let's talk about it. Game 1 was less boring. Canyon on the Diana was able to get ahead early and was able to kind of just move around, do a lot of good things. Not really much else to talk about. Canyon just got ahead, and then Dekdom was able to close it out in team fights. I really do like Showmaker on these more supportive picks, at least right now, because this team is clearly not in a position to play full offensive. They just don't have the skill to do it, and most of that comes from top lane. This top lane is still a gigantic issue. Game 1, not so much. The Camille looked fine in the Gragas. I'm not really too concerned. Game 2 is really where things just got, I mean, ridiculously tedious. I mean, the score ended 6-7 after 35 minutes. I mean, that alone is horrendous and atrocious and gross. But just the way everyone played, I mean, Canyon on the Jarvan, you got to be proactive on that guy, and nothing happened. got a lot of kills on the Lilia. None of them felt really that important, though. And then Morgan is my dud of the series, but even he won top lane. He just couldn't do anything with it on the Gwen. Really, this series just came down to Dekdom on the Aphelios, which again, if you give Dekdom Aphelios, he's going to win you late game team fights, and that's exactly what happened. Kellen actually did not have a good series here. I was not pleased at all with how Kellen played, especially on the Karma. The Karma game was not good with Kellen. Obviously, him and Dekdom have synergy from last year, but boy, is it just kind of not so good so far. Dektum's really been the only carry aspect of this Damwon team, even a little bit. So, very, very interesting in general for Damwon. But, I mean, you know, bro, going up against Gen.G and Damwon this week, not the best schedule, unfortunately, for them. But hopefully they can kind of turn it around. There's a chance they're not one of the bottom 2 teams in the league. I don't know if I'm willing to say that just yet, but there for sure is a chance. T played well in game 2. Like I said, he got a ton of kills on the Lilia. But none of them really had any impact, and then nobody else really did anything on Bro the entire game. Their macro's kind of been a problem, just in general, of them not being proactive enough, but Damwon still has some things to figure out, really. This doesn't change my opinion on either team. Dektum is still the primary carry for this Damwon team, with Canyon and Showmaker taking more backseat roles, even with Showmaker having like 400 CS at like 30 minutes or whatever he had, something ludicrous. And then top lane, I should say, really has to be figured out for Damwon. I mean, you got to figure that out like right now, because it is a gigantic problem. The Gragas game in Game 2 was not good. He ended up having to build Targons just to be relatively useful, and that's a disaster. And so, whatever your top lane, like, if I'm, you know, I'm begging Nuggery, I'm on the phone right now, pleading and begging, like, whatever I have to give you to come out of retirement to make our team an LCK contender, I'm gonna do, because I really don't believe they can be an LCK contender if top lane is going to be this useless. And unfortunately, that's just what it is right now. So, yeah, Bertle and Kellen have to step up. They had a poor series. Canyon and Dektum played well. Showmaker played well, you know, similarly, but he just didn't have any flashy plays. A decent series here for Damwon. Nothing that you're going to write home about. And then Bro just kind of slowly bled out. Didn't really do anything. So, you know, I guess it's a good series because you bled out against Damwon and didn't get obliterated. But, you know, you didn't do anything. So I still have to question your macro in general. Overall, a boring series that I highly recommend nobody goes back and rewatches. Moving on to our second series of Day 4. Day 4, of course, being known in Week 2 here of 2022 Spring as the Boring Day. We had Gen.G taking on Hanwha Life in a 2-1 series win for Gen.G. They dropped Game 1. What was that about? Not to take away from Hanwha. Hanwha had a good Game 1, especially Vista on that Lux. The Lux Caitlyn is a, you know, very highly prioritized bot lane duo, but we really haven't seen the Lux be the reason that is the problem. And in this game it was. Vista played really well in Game 1. Probably the best Lux game I've seen globally so far in 2022. Just an overall good game. SamD and Vista have pretty good chemistry, and they've shown that at the beginning of the year. And then Karis, I thought, played well on the Victor. So Game 1 wasn't too bad. I honestly, Dudu on the Graves as well, I think was fine. On Fleek on Lee. Game 1 overall, Hanwha was the better team. And they played like the better team. Pretty much everybody on that team just outpositioned their counterpart on Gen.G. But Game 2, a game where honestly Gen.G didn't play that particularly well outside of Doran just being really, really freaking good on the Gragas. Doran hard carried this team early and late, really. I mean, Peanut got his Poppy and he was able to make a lot of plays in the top lane and then help Chovy out a lot in the mid lane. Chovy was up in CS, but man, what a disaster of a game from Chovy here in Game 2. This is probably the worst game of Chovy that I've seen in a very long time. He just got outplayed by Karis in lane for the most part, and then did nothing across the map. So, not what you really want to see out of Chovy, but Game 3 was a little bit of a bounce back, at least from everybody. Game 3 was a lot more in Gen.G's favor. Still very Doran favored. Doran on the Gnar still kind of took over those team fights, but I think in general it was a lot closer. Peanut had a really good Game 3 here on the Jarvan, I think, which helped a lot. And then the Akali is always going to be, you know, a more comfortable pick here for Chovy. The Orianna Shockwaves were not good. So to get him something maybe get him on something a little more proactive here in the Akali, I think is probably a good idea in general. But just a weird series here from Gen.G. Chovy especially. Chovy's someone that obviously, you know, people talk about him as one of the best players in the world, one of the top 2-3 players in the world, and he deserves that. But he has some real stinkers, and games 1 and 2 of this series were those. The Ryze Realm Warps in Game 1 were disastrous. I mean, just horrendously bad. I mean, he shockwaved 0 people at a dragon fight late in the game as Orianna in Game 2. He looked better in Game 3, but definitely a tough series from Chovy. The slack was for sure picked up by Doran in the top lane, who I think you could make a case has been one of the better members for Gen.G at the start of this year. I would argue that Peanut has been the best player for this Gen.G team in Lehens is probably a close second, but Doran is still having a really good year. And he showed that in games 2 and 3 where he really took over on the Gragas and the Gnar. So a big shout out to Doran for being kind of the guy here. He is my player of the series. On Fleek is going to get my dud of the series. I just wish he was a little bit more proactive in those games 2 and 3. Did get a little bit outplayed there by Peanut as the end game kind of went on. But in general, still a decent series from Hanwha. Game 1 was a stomp. They were the better team, period. And then games 2 and 3, they kind of just got a little bit exposed. I thought Karis played rather well, and so did Dudu in every game except for game 3. So, and then Vista had a really good game 1 as well. So, definitely bright spots to take away for Hanwha, but overall, I'm definitely concerned about Gen.G with how they played with this. Again, not throwing in the red flag. They're still probably the best team in the LCK, and at the end of the day, it's still a win, but definitely not the most excited I've ever been for a series here for Gen.G. Let's jump into our final day of LCK Week 2 action here with Day 5 being kicked off with Liiv SANDBOX taking on T1. And a 2-0 clean sweep here from T1. Again, T1's the better team. Not much to say here. We get the Closer Faker matchup. Obviously, former T1 mids going up against each other. And you could argue Closer actually won this one. Faker with his worst series of the year by far up to this point. And I'm quite positive it's just because there were 2 games of Corki and just wasn't interested. Corki's not a pick. We know Corki's not a pick he enjoys too much, but yeah, definitely a tough series here from Faker, especially that game 1. Very, very interesting. He was kind of a big reason SANDBOX were in that game in the first place, but Zeus, by the way, I've been calling him Zeus the entire time. Apologies, it's Zeus, but Zeus just rolls off more naturally. If I flip-flop back and forth, I'm sorry. I'm working on trying to fix that, but Zeus here in the top lane just dominated that game 1 on Gnar. I mean, just completely took over. What an absolute Chad. Owner is playing really well right now. This reminds me of Bengi a lot with how he plays that just very similar play style. I'm really liking how this top side played in game 1. And then in game 2, it was really all about the bot side here with Gumayusi and Keria just kind of taking over. Gumayusi on the Jinx is pretty unstoppable when he gets ahead. And that's basically what happened here. You know, just a fantastic series from pretty much everyone on T1, not named Faker, but it's fine because Faker got carried and the game ended in like 25 minutes. So, I mean, how many flaws can you really point out on T1? Zeus is going to be my player of the series here. My dud of the series is going to go to Ice on Liiv SANDBOX. Just didn't do anything, but that's kind of Liiv SANDBOX in a nutshell. If you watch both their series from week 2, their macro is disappointingly boring and bad. And that's kind of what happened here. I think you could have given the dud of the series here to Dove. You could have given it to Kale. The only one who I think you couldn't have given it to was probably Closer, because Closer actually played pretty well here in this series. He's been kind of a weak point for this team at the beginning of the year, but he was kind of decent in this series going into Faker. And then Krako made some plays on Hecarim in game 1 as well that I wouldn't have given it to him. At least he showed something. So, yeah, Ice is my dud of the series here, but yeah, not much to talk about. Kind of a boring series here. T1 just kind of outclassing Liiv at every aspect. Zeus playing really well. Gumayusi playing really well. It's a bright sign to see that T1 kind of gets carried by their young stars now. Faker doesn't have to be that guy. Even Keria doesn't have to be that guy every game. Even though he had a good series, and he had a really good game too on the Thresh, he doesn't have to be that guy. You can let it be Zeus, or you can let it be Gumayusi. And you can have the main guys kind of struggling a little bit, and you can still win games. Very comfortably, might I add, as well. So, definitely a good sign here for T1. As for Liiv, meh. I mean, this team is probably not good, just in general. I feel like at least one person on this team plays fine in every series. Most of the time, it's Krako. And that's kind of what we expected out of this team going into the year, right? Where we were like, this jungle's really good, but he doesn't have a ton of talent around him. Maybe the mid laner can step up. Closer was good in the series, but he's been inconsistent. This bot lane is a gigantic weakness. Dove was really, he's been pretty consistent to start the year, but Zeus is just better, and he got outclassed in this series. So, yeah, not a ton of good to talk about for Liiv in this series, but T1's cruising, man. I mean, they look as consistent as ever. I really, really cannot wait to see them actually play some of the more top teams, because I want to see what they're going to do and how they're going to respond. So far, they've had a lot of easier games, so it'll be interesting to see what they can do against a team like Gen.G, or a team like KT, or Nongshim, or even DAMWON. Like, what is that going to look like? I guess we'll just have to wait to find out. Jumping into the final series of Week 2, it was a series to talk about, I guess. We had Kwangdong Freecs taking on DRX in a DRX 2-0 win. DRX actually getting some wins here. Their first wins of the year, even in just games. But man, were they boring ones. Hoo-wee, what games. A 41-minute 6-8 game, a 48-minute 8-16 game that was slower than anything I've ever watched. This is the worst of League of Legends. I have no other way to say it. This is the worst of Korean boredom. When even your casters are being like, nothing is happening in this game. That's when you know things are a problem. But let's talk about DRX finally getting a win. I guess they looked good. I mean, in game 1, they really shouldn't have won. In game 2, they really shouldn't have won. So, yay, DRX. They kind of pull out both games out of their ass. You know, in spite of Kingin, who is still really not good. He's definitely one of the weakest players in the LCK. Zika played well in game 1 on the Akali. He was a really big part of why they won those team fights late. And then Barrel's engages on the Thresh were good as well. And then in game 2, really you're talking about Pyosik kind of taking over the map on Xin Zhao early, and then Barrel with some amazing engages on Rakan late. My player of the series is going to go to Zika in the mid lane. I thought he was just the most consistent member of this team. But you could have given it to Barrel as well. I think Barrel absolutely deserved it for his Rakan in game 2. As for the dud of the series, I mean, anyone except for Teddy. And maybe Keen, I guess he at least won lane, but he did nothing with it. You could give it to Elam, who just got completely out-jungled on Nidalee in game 2. Give it to Fate, who's doing his best to look exactly like Fly did last year. You could give it to Hoyt, which I did. Hoyt is the dud of the series because I don't think he hit a single Leona engage the entire game. You could give it to Kingin, because Kingin was garbage the entire game. He got destroyed by Keen in lane, and just because Keen did nothing with it doesn't mean Kingin did better. What a terrible series this was. Don't go back and watch this. It's not good. I do feel really bad for Teddy, because, man, game 2 was decided, wasn't it? It was like, no matter how well Teddy played on that Jhin in those team fights, it was never going to matter, because the rest of his team was just so bad. Elam and Hoyt have been two of the worst players in the LCK since the start of 2022, and Fate has just been completely irrelevant in pretty much every game. Keen wins lane and then does nothing with it. He just looks dejected. This team feels dejected. They feel like they don't have anything to play for. DRX finally gets a win, but it's not even this big standout win because, I mean, it just felt, the game felt disastrous in general. It felt pointless. At least Zika's playing well. Pyosik with his best series of the year by far here, but he is going into maybe the worst jungler in the LCK in 2022. Kingin still looks like the worst player in the LCK in 2022, but at least Deft and Barrel still look good. Barrel probably having one of his better series. Deft, him and Deft have been the strong point of this DRX team, and they continue to show up for this win here, so that's good. It's just everybody else that also at least kind of played decent this series, but man, neither of these two teams are that good, are they? That's kind of the concern I'm starting to get at this point, is neither of these teams are really that good. DRX does get the win here, but I don't think anybody, a fan of either of these teams, is really going to be excited about the series at all. Alright, that is going to do it for my Week 2 review and analysis. Up on the screen right now, on the left, you are going to see the current LCK standings. Any ties in terms of both matches and series records will be broken just alphabetically. So the bottom, I believe, 3 teams are all just broken alphabetically. Everybody's at 1 and 3 right now. A bunch of them are at 2 and 6. Disastrous starts of the year for a lot of teams. There's a 1 and 3 team in the playoffs at the moment. Anyways, on the right-hand side, you're going to see my power rankings and how they've updated after Week 2. Remember, big caveat here, my power rankings are how strong I think the teams are, not how they have played up until this point. I'm not just going to copy and paste the standings. Some people are going to be mad that I have DRX still in playoffs, or that DAMWON still above Nongshim. I just firmly believe those are going to be better teams by the end of Spring Split. But maybe I'm just optimistic. Biggest risers and fallers this week. The biggest risers, nobody really rose that much. T1 jumped up over DAMWON because they're better. Nongshim had a great week here. They're probably going to be my quote-unquote biggest riser in terms of my opinion of them. They had a great week. They were phenomenal in general. And then Kwangdong jumped up. Kwangdong and DRX just jumped because Liiv SANDBOX is our biggest follower this week. They were atrociously bad. Their bot lane is just going to cost them games. Period. Is there a chance that Fredit BRION is the 6th best team in the LCK right now? Absolutely. They've only played good teams, and they've been competitive in those games, but I actually need to see them win some series before I actually believe that they're going to be that good, because really, on paper, they shouldn't be. On paper, they should not be better than DRX or Kwangdong. But could they be? Absolutely. Could Hanwha be that? Maybe. I don't know. The bottom of the LCK is just such a mystery right now. But this is just what I'm sticking with at the moment. My player of the week is going to go to Dread on Nongshim. It was very close to going to Peter on Nongshim as well, but Dread is going to get my player of the week here for week 2. My dud of the week. A lot of people are deserving of this award, but for me, it's going to go to Kale on Liiv SANDBOX. The support, he was the worst player in the LCK this week, in my opinion, at least over the course of both of their series. So, Kale is my dud of the week. Dread is my player of the week. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. I love chatting it up with you guys in the comment section, so if you have any thoughts, let me know. If you enjoyed any games, let me know. I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.